going on, ladies and gentlemen? AJ Good here at the House of Masks, and you guys know what the deal is by now. This is the Slipknot Definitive Mask History Series, and today we are doing James Root.
Oh my god, why'd you call him James? His name is Jim Root.
Well, actually, his Instagram says James. What a weird fucking thing for you guys to complain about. Anyways, for those of you that are new here, this is the series where we take a deep dive into the history of all of Slipknot's masks, member by member, and we set out to archive every single one. So first up, we're doing the original core band, that is Sid through Corey. Then we'll be working on some of the new members, and then we will be working on ex-members. So with all of that being said, let's not waste any more time. We're gonna hop right on into the first list, and that is James Root's self-titled masks. Let's go. Alright, so real quick, as always, I'm going to give a nice big thank you to Nico and his website slipknothistory.com, which definitely helps me with a lot of these photos. I am going to be dropping the website's information down below, slipknothistory.com. Make sure to go check them out. There are tons and tons of photo albums over there, not just of the Slipknot masks, but the jumpsuits as well. There's a separate page for oddball masks, all that good shit, so make sure to go check them out, and let's get on into Jim Root's self-titled mask list, and we start off with a very, very controversial mask, and for some reason, no matter how long this information's been out there, people still refuse to believe that Jim actually wore this hood. Both Jim and Josh have confirmed on separate occasions that Jim did in fact wear this hood.
I ended up wearing a bondage hood that was a size too small for my head, so my sweat was just filling up inside of this thing, and my ears were literally under water, under sweat, and it was, you know, I couldn't move, and it was pushing my jaw back, and it was just extremely uncomfortable.
I've even made a video that was specifically about this topic, and for some reason, people still like to argue that Jim never wore the bondage hood. But nonetheless, here we have Jim Root's first mask with the band Slipknot, the bondage hood, and he actually only used this for one live show because it was so uncomfortable and terrible. He was basically drowning inside the mask. He said that his ears were filling up with water and all that crazy shit, so he quickly changed to the Jester mask, which brings us to our first Jester mask, and that is the early Ozfest mask. So when Slipknot took off for Ozfest, we saw Jim sporting this nice, clean variant of his Jester. This is hands down one of the coolest versions for me because a lot of the choices on this mask don't seem to make sense. There are a few stitched areas on the forehead and the cheek that just kinda shouldn't be there, but they are anyways, and I think that it looks really cool. This is definitely your basic Slipknot mask at its core. We've got a zipper mouth, we've got lots of leather bondage style strapping, we've got stitching, and all of this was done on a regular store-bought mask. This mask pretty much epitomizes what a Slipknot mask was back in the day, and I really, really dig it. I think that his Ozfest was one of his coolest, and we got to see it go through various changes, such as the slightly weathered Ozfest Jester. Now you can see that this thing is starting to yellow, it's starting to get a little dirtier, and eventually we're going to start to see it rot like in this photo. Now we're in full-on grunge mode, and here's a fun fact. Jim actually had a giant rot hole in the nose that he started to patch with caulking. So with the members of Slipknot and their crew not really knowing much about masks, they just decided they would fix the rot by cutting the holes out and then refilling them with caulking, giving this a very, very strange look. Definitely one of my favorite Jim masks. I know I said it with the clean version, but I actually think that I dig the rotting version of it even more. We've got a lot of paint missing here. We're starting to rust up. Just everything about this version was cool. Now last but not least for the Ozfest mask was a version that my buddy Joey Fabricius and I found a few years ago when we were looking to knock out a bunch of different Jesters for my collection. We refer to this version as the white face paint version, and it's because the entire mask was coated with a thick white face paint covering almost every single colored portion of the mask. As you can see, the eyes no longer have red around them, and pretty much the only thing that stayed true to the original paint job was the chin horn. You can also see that the mask is heavily deteriorating. A lot of that caulking has come off, and there is more rot going on around the nose area, and it appears as though Jim has added some tribal markings around the lip, and they go between all of the rivets there, so it gives it almost a Joey look to this mask. Now we have no clue why, but this mask was actually only worn once in this state, and it was way later into Slipknot's self-titled days. Jim just broke this out for one show, wore it the way that it was, and then we never saw it again. Next up, we've got a new Jester conversion wasn't for Jim, this is what would eventually become the Dynamo variant. For some reason, whoever converted this for Jim left the neck very open, a lot of different cuts going on. And as tight as this mask was worn by Jim and as much abuse as he put it through, you know that that neck isn't going to last very long the way that it is, so eventually we get a patch. This photo doesn't show it so grand, but I'm sure that if you guys are familiar with the Dynamo concert, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. That neck patch was just another piece of latex from another mask, stitched to the different neck cuts and flaps from the previous version to kind of give them a little bit more durability, and to make sure that they wouldn't rip as much as they would without the patch.
The wild women, the ripping and the tearing, the ripping and the tearing.
Here we see the Dynamo mask a little bit further into its life. As you can see, there is some rot starting to form around the nose, and we've also got this really weird tint on the mask from Jim's hair dye. The mask continued to rot this way until the end of its days. Here we see Jim's next Jester conversion for the self-titled era, and this is the W neck, and this is actually the pre-W neck. The reason that we call this the pre-W neck is because, as you'll see here shortly, Jim added another patch to this mask, and the neck was actually cut into that of a W shape. So here is the pre-W neck, obviously prior to having that patch, and here is the W neck variant. As you can see, you've got that nice W shape with the patch down below, and this mask did not stay bright white for long due to Jim's hair dye. By the time we see it at the Kerrang 2000s award, the mask is a very blue-purple look, definitely a unique look for Jim's Jesters. I absolutely adore this version. Easily one of the coolest, most standout of all of Jim's actual Jester conversions. Now, a fun fact about this Jester conversion, we're actually going to see this on the Iowa list later, because not only did Jim wear it here for the late self-titled era, but he also sported it a good bit during Iowa. Here we have a unique variation of the W-neck Jester. This was after the Kerrang Awards, and you can see that Jim actually has some face paint in his hair, which easily covered the mask over the course of this concert. This was during a Halloween show, and for whatever reason, Jim smeared a bunch of white face paint in his hair, and as he headbanged and sweated through the night, the face paint started to cover not only his mask, but his guitar and his suit as well, giving the entire look a very ghastly, pasty look. Now, as far as we know, the W-neck was the last mask that Jim wore for the self-titled era, which will take us straight into Iowa. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Iowa era for Jim Root's masks, and this is going to be an interesting era, not only because we do see a good amount of variations for the actual Jester conversions, but we also see the first masks that were ever sculpted for James. So there are going to be 3 styles of masks that we'll see here, and that is the Forum's Novelties Jester conversions, and then 2 separate styles of sculpts that were completed by the artist Screaming Mad George for Jim. I do believe that the Iowa era, along with the self-titled era, are the most interesting for Jim's masks, but we'll go ahead and hop on into this and let you guys decide for yourself. Now, first up, we've got that familiar face, the W neck, which I talked about in the self-titled era. It was actually the last mask that Jim wore for the self-titled era, and as you can see, he continues to wear it here during Iowa. Now, as you can see, it has changed slightly from the last time that we saw it. You can't see so much of the blues and the purples, and you can't see so much of the old face paint residue that was left on there. However, we do have a very strange purplish red dye going on the face now, also a side effect from Jim Root's hair dye. Moving on, we see that Jim has yet again added white face paint to his hair, and that is presumably what has gotten onto the mask here, giving it another pastel, pasty white look. And just for the record, this is probably my all-time favorite photo of Jim. I don't know, just super badass. Fight me. As we continue along with the mask, we have the late Iowa W neck, and the mask has gone back to a purple color, again, because Jim was constantly doing different hair dyes with his hair, and it just seemed to dye the mask every single time, giving it a drastically different appearance almost every time we saw it. And last but not least, for the W neck Jester, we seem to have what appears to be rot on the nose. As you can see, there are tons of different colors going on the face here, all kinds of dirt and grime, but what we also see is a white nose. Now, to me, this nose looks extremely reminiscent of the Ozfest Jester. Now, I can't tell if that is caulking on the nose, and unfortunately, this is the only photo that we have to go off of the mask in this condition, but it wouldn't surprise me if the mask had started to rot and he did a small touch up there with caulking again. As I mentioned earlier, this is the last variation of the W neck, which brings us to the Disaster Pieces Jester, and this is actually pre-Disaster Pieces, and this was a very, very strange look, again, only seen in 1 or or two photos, and this is the long neck Disaster Pieces Jester. Now for some reason with this mask, they left a very long neck intact. James later trimmed this neck up, and we got what we know and love as the Disaster Pieces Jester. Now clearly the Disaster Pieces Jester was used in Disaster Pieces, and that is why we call it the Disaster Pieces. And this one had a very unique look. It was very straight and forward, it was very clean, there was no extra stitching, there was no extra neck patch, the zipper was straight across, and the mask really didn't weather that heavily. Clearly the mask did weather, leading us to the weathered version, but it's still nothing crazy. It's just a little wear and tear here and there. Now one thing that I always thought was interesting about this mask is that the strapping seemed to bubble the mask out on the cheeks very, very far. Jim always just kind of looked like a chipmunk with this mask. Here we see the Disaster Pieces mask with a surgical mask on top of it. The word life is written in kanji on the mask. Jim and Clown were known to throw these masks on while in Japan. Next up, we have the Reading 2002 Jester. This would be the last converted Forums Novelties Jester that we would see Jim wear for quite some time, and definitely the last on the Iowa era. Now, if you ask me, this is hands down the weirdest converted Jester that Jim ever wore. I don't really know how to explain it, but it just had a very lazy look to it. Whoever converted this just didn't really try. Also, just a side note, this is the only Jester conversion of Jim's to not feature a zipper handle. Now we move on to the masks that Jim actually had sculpted for him during Iowa, and these were all created by artist Screaming Mad George. First up, we have the silver Iowa Jim mask, and this is hands down one of, if not my all-time favorite Jim mask. There is just something absolutely sinister about this piece. I love this fucking thing. It is immaculate, it is beautiful, there's a strange choice of color going on with an all silver and black look, and I don't know, it's just really fucking rad. I remember seeing this on the cover of Guitar magazine when I was very young and just falling in love with it. Now this mask did have a few different variations. Obviously here we have the bright silver version, and these masks definitely started to wear and tear and weather up because as you can see here, this mask looks completely different. It's got a very strange color, and as you can tell, it is just beat the hell up. Here we can see the mask during the Freddy vs. Jason premiere, again looking very, very strange, almost like a hazy gray rather than a silver, but you can still see some of the sheen left on the mask, and the mask was just absolutely destroyed at this point. You can see a lot of the raw foam, and you can see that the mask has started to get a crazy texture on it from where it has started to dry rot. Here we have another silver variant of the sculpted Iowa Jim mask, and this one was silver, however it was a dull silver, almost a matte silver, whereas the other one actually did have quite a bit of a shine to it. This mask also did not feature an over-the-head strap, although it does appear that it had one at one point. Maybe Jim just cut it off, he didn't like the way that it felt. And out of the two, I don't like this one nearly as much. It's crazy that little details can affect a mask this much. Moving on, we have the second variation of Jim's sculpted masks from the Iowa era, and this is what we refer to as the Weird Iowa Jim. This one is referred to as the Weird Iowa Jim because it bears almost no resemblance to the other Jesters. Aside from having a zipper in the mouth and technically being a Jester style mask, it doesn't really look like the others. Clearly, the silver masks were based directly off of the Forums Novelties Jesters, however, this one has a look of its own. Jim barely ever wore this mask, so finding pics and footage of it is an absolute treat, and the mask did go through some changes. Here we have the mask with the top strap of the forehead cut off, once again changing the mask a lot. You can also see that the mask has been heavily weathered at this point. And here we have the same mask again during the recording of the Volume 3 album. You can see Jim wearing this in some photos at the Houdini Mansion, and clearly it is absolutely destroyed. Basically the same thing that had happened with the Silver Jester over time has started to happen to this mask. They were both foam latex masks, meaning that they soaked up any amount of moisture, sweat, like a sponge, and that sped up the rotting and dry rotting process a lot quicker than a normal mask. So here you can see that there is a ton of weathering on the mask. You can also see that it has started to kind of condense on itself and shrink a little bit. There's just a lot of shriveling and new textures going on. Now clearly seeing this mask used during the recording of the Volume 3 era can only mean one thing, and that is that we are getting extremely close to the Volume 3 era. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at the Volume 3 cycle right after this word from our sponsor.
Ha! Just kidding. No companies have the balls to work with the House of Masks. And with that being said, we're on to Volume 3.
Alright guys, we are working our way into the Volume 3 cycle, starting off with this first mask here, and keep in mind there won't be a whole lot of changes to the Volume 3 and the All Hope Is Gone mask. Honestly, this is where things tend to get a little stale in terms of Jim's masks. We do not see many big changes from this general idea here. Clearly what we have here is a mask that was once again sculpted for Jim. We are sticking with the Jester theme here, but we have gone to a much simpler design. It's a very clean white face mask. It still has the zipper and it still has the prominent black and red features, but that is about it. This exact copy here is what we refer to as the clean V1, which leads us into the slightly weathered version of it. As you can see, a lot of the colors are getting darker. Almost all of the paint on the lips has faded away, and we also have some face paint and dirt smears on the mask itself. Now, finally for this version, we have the extremely weathered V1, and this one not only has the normal wear and tear and a lot of face paint smears and smudges, but it's also showing a lot of the raw latex underneath the paint job. As you can see down around the chin and neck area, as well as on the nose, the cheeks, and the eyebrows, we all have a lot of exposed latex. Now, it's not certain if Jim had multiple copies of these or if he had just done some touch-ups from time to time, because as you can see on this image, the mask is clearly beaten up and weathered beyond belief, but it still has more red on the lips than the prior version. So if I had to guess, this was a completely separate copy, and the paint on it might not have been as good as the paint on the previous version. Moving on, we have the V2 Jim, and what you'll notice right away is that this is Jim's first mask, aside from the bondage hood, to not feature a zipper. I remember when I saw promo shots for this coming out with Jim at the Houdini Mansion, I was blown away because Jim finally didn't have a zipper, and honestly, I really did like the look of the mask. Now, clearly this mask is from the exact same sculpt and mold as the V1. The only difference here is that it is missing that zipper. Now, how this mask came to be is beyond me. I'm not sure exactly what happened, if it was just an unfinished copy, if Jim specifically requested not to have a zipper, I'm not sure, but from the get-go, it did have some weathering done to it. As you can see in this photo, once again, the chin and the lip area seem to be very heavily weathered, showing some raw latex. Now, one thing that you will notice about this first image as compared to this second image is that this version here actually has red on the lips. Now, clearly that red on the lips had already started to flake off by the time that this photo was taken, but it does count for something. Clearly there was red on the lips here, whereas on the previous copy, there was no red on the lips. Alright, and last but not least, as always for the Volume 3 masks, we are going to be taking a look at Jim's death mask. Once again, not much here that I can say that I haven't said in the previous episodes. These were just plastic masks that Slipknot decided to use for Volume 3 of their own faces. They were translucent, but also had a slightly foggy finish, and Slipknot would wear face paint underneath, giving them an even more grim and dark, macabre look. These masks were made out of plastic and often used during the performance of Vermilion. And believe it or not, that is all of Jim's masks for the Volume 3 era.
I'm sorry, I didn't think that we'd get done with Volume 3 that quick, but I guess we did, so here's All Hope Is Gone.
So as we dive on into the All Hope Is Gone era, I want to give you guys a little bit of information here. This was actually the first album to not feature Screaming Mad George as the artist behind the sculpted masks for Slipknot. During this cycle, Screaming Mad George actually passed the torch down to one of his students, a Mr. Rayless Khan. So the masks that were sculpted from the band starting from the Tattoo the Earth era with the Tattoo the Earth clown through Iowa and Volume 3 were all done by Screaming Mad George and his team, but now that duty has fallen upon a new artist, Mr. Rayless, and we will see what he brings to the table here. Starting off with this Jim Root All Hope Is Gone. Oh, wait a second, that's actually a Volume 3. Sorry about that. Starting off with this Jim Root All Hope Is Gone mask, and oh my god, that is a Volume 3 mask again. Alright, let's just start off with the All Hope Is Gone promo Purgatory masks, or the Purgatory Potatoes as you guys have come to know and love them. These giant paper mache heads were used for quite a bit of promo material for the All Hope Is Gone era, and they were also used in the Psychosocial music video. And they were also used in the Psychosocial music video. Apparently, these giant papier-mâché likenesses of each member represented that member's ego, or their big-headedness. Clearly, by the time All Hope Is Gone came around, the band was very big and very successful, and had been for quite some time. In the Psychosocial music video, you can see them actually burning these heads, which was meant to be taken as a metaphor for them losing their ego. Moving right along, we have the debut All Hope Is Gone Jim mask, and as I mentioned earlier, it is extremely similar to the Volume 3 mask. Potentially from the same mold, or at least a retool of that sculpt, we kept the same general idea with the same general paint job. Moving along throughout the cycle, we would see many retooled variants with slightly different paint jobs. As you can see here, we got another silver and black variant, one of my favorites. I just think that the use of silver on a Jester mask looks really cool for some reason. And moving along, we also have a gray variation. Further down the line, we see the promo version with more weathering going on. For some reason, these Volume 3 and All Hope Is Gone masks really like to weather around the lips and the chin area, specifically on the left side. Moving away from the Volume 3 / All Hope Is Gone sculpts, we now see an All Hope Is Gone mask that was a completely new sculpt. Still pretty similar sculpturally, but it is a different sculpt, and this is a weird version because it doesn't have a zipper, but it does have a zipper handle. Now, whether or not this thing featured a zipper and Jim decided to cut it out, as he is known to modify his masks in that manner, is beyond me, but it does still have the zipper handle, which I always felt gave it a very interesting look. I don't necessarily like the way this mask looks, but for any Slipknot mask makers out there, I've never seen someone nail this mask or even attempt it for that matter, so get on it. Next up, we see our old friend, the Forum's Novelties Jester conversion, and this is actually a recast that was converted for the Sonosphere show. After Paul had passed away and they decided to do somewhat of a memorial or throwback show, a lot of the members were wearing masks similar to their older masks. So clearly, Jim has a Forum's Novelties Jester conversion. Doesn't quite look like any of the masks that he wore prior, but that's pretty cool because it does make this its own version. It wasn't trying to be one of those old masks, just something similar for nostalgia. Here we have the pre-cut Silver Jester, and Jim never actually wore it in this manner. Once again, a completely new sculpt, and the reason that I'm showing this photo, even though Jim never actually wore it in this state, is to just show you guys what it looked like in full before Jim cut the mouth and chin out. This mask is what would lead us to how Jim's masks have looked for the past few album cycles with the open mouth, no chin, beard hanging out look. As you can see, the mask had already started to be cut in this photo, but there's also footage of Jim taking the scissors and removing that mouth himself backstage. Something interesting about this piece is, once again, it has no zipper in the mouth. Then we would see another variation of this sculpt with a zipper in, but the mouth removed, so we only have the top of the zipper there. Now clearly this one has a slightly different paint job, and once again he's gone with a silver and black look, and if I've said it once, I've said it a million times, silver and black just works for the Jim mask. So this would be the last mask that we see Jim wear for the All Hope Is Gone era, and this style would stick around till this day. Although the sculpts have changed, Jim's beard has only gotten bigger and bigger, and he has stuck with the open chin mask style. Alright, point 5, the gray chapter. This one's gonna go by quick, so pay attention. Point 5, Jim Root mask. Point 5, Jim Root mask. Next up, We Are Not Your Kind. Another easy breezy cycle to get through. The We Are Not Your Kind era is still in its infancy. It is brand new, so clearly we're not going to see too many masks from this cycle. Unlike the point 5 cycle where it was around for the full amount and we only saw 2 different variants, the We Are Not Your Kind cycle is still very new. So first up, we've got the clean We Are Not Your Kind Jim. Personally, I find this to be a step up from the gray chapter mask, and I definitely dig the clean look. And this leads us into our weathered We Are Not Your Kind Jim. Still the same mask, just some weathering going on, and it does appear that there are 2 separate copies of this mask, one of them featuring a red ring around the true right eye, or the left eye on the image here, and one of them featuring a black ring like the one that you see in this photo. And that is it. Jim has had around 50 different variations of his mask in his career in Slipknot. Will there be more to come? I'm sure. Will there be new variations discovered? Probably, but that's the fun with the Slipknot mask hobby. There is so much history that more and more just keeps coming out.
That's what she said.
And with that being said, you guys know what time it is. Make sure to let me know down below what your all-time favorite Jim Root mask is. Mine was a really hard decision between the Ozfest, both clean and rotting, and the Silver Iowa, but I think just for nostalgia's sake, I've got to go with the Silver Iowa. That mask literally changed my life. Obviously, I love masks and stuff, but it's not too often that one sticks with you the way that this Silver Iowa has stuck with me all these years. So, let me know your favorite down below, and that is going to do it for this video. I hope that you guys have enjoyed it, and I hope that maybe you learned something. So, until next time, this has been AJ Good at the House of Masks telling you to say no to drugs and alcohol, and we'll see you guys later.